Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to study about the different types of precipitation and what are the different forms of precipitation in which it occurs. So let's start. So first of all, what do we mean by the term that is known as the precipitation? So this precipitation, it is an umbrella term which represents all the forms of the water which is falling onto the earth surface or which is reaching the earth surface from the atmosphere. That means all the forms of the water which is reaching the earth surface through the atmosphere, that is known as the precipitation. But to form this precipitation, there must be certain conditions which must exist, and the first condition is that there should be enough presence of the moisture in the atmosphere. Second one is the presence of the sufficient nuclei particles to help condensation. Third is weather conditions must be optimum for condensation to take place, and these products of the condensation, which is known as the precipitation, they must reach the earth surface. Because if that particular precipitation is obstructed by any object or any natural or man-made obstruction, then that is known as the interception and not the precipitation. Now, when we study the different types of precipitation, that is classified based upon the conditions which are generating or which are causing this precipitation to happen. So this precipitation occurs when the moist air mass, that means the air mass that is having sufficient moisture, that undergoes the condensation process. Now this process happens when the air is cooled and saturated with the same amount of moisture. Now what happens, let's say this is the any water surface. When it is exposed to the sunlight, let's say this is the sun that we are representing. So this water surface will be exposed continuously to the sunlight. Because of this continuous exposure to the sunlight, the temperature of the water body that will increase up to a certain degree. Because of that, there will be evaporation from the water body. That means this water will be converted into the water vapors, which is a gaseous form, that is known as the vapors. Now, this process of converting the state of matter from liquid to the gaseous state, that is known as the evaporation. Now, these vapors, because of their weight, because these vapors, they are present in the form of the gas which is having negligible mass. So because of their low mass, these vapors, they tend to ascend the different altitudes. It continuously increases its height, and when the sufficient vapors are collected, they are combinedly forming the clouds. Now before this forming of the clouds, let's just understand that these number of vapors, they form a balloon or a packet or a blanket air mass in which the number of vapors are concentrated. Now every blanket or the packet, that will be having a certain capacity up to which the vapors can be placed in this blanket. Let's say this packet is having the capacity to hold the 100 vapors in it. So when this air mass which is having the vapors having the lower mass, that will be continuously ascending in the atmosphere. Now the general, let's say this is the ground level, the general rule of the temperature, it says that whenever you move above the earth surface, the temperature decreases continuously, and this rate at which the temperature decreases, that is known as the lapse rate. That means by how much degrees temperature is decreasing when we are ascending a certain height, and that rate is usually 6.5 degrees centigrade per kilometer. That means if you reach, let's say this is 0 point, and if you are looking at the 1 kilometer above, then the difference of the temperature would be 6.5 degree. And you know the density, that is mass per unit volume. So if let's say this is a certain mass, if we are increasing the temperature, there is a chance of increasing its volume. And let's say if we are decreasing the temperature, then there will be contraction in its volume. So if we are reaching the higher altitudes, that means its temperature is decreasing, because at the different height the temperature decreases. So as the temperature is decreasing, that means the volume is decreasing, and as the volume is decreasing, the density will be increasing. Now as the volume will be decreasing, its density will be increasing. Now because of this decrease in the volume, now what will happen? This packet, this will get contracted. Now the capacity of it will be reduced. Now let's say this capacity is of 90. So that means the 10 units of the vapors, they are extra. Now when such condition arises, then again these vapors are converted into the liquid form, and that process of converting the gas molecules to the liquid molecules, that is known as the condensation. And during this condensation process, these vapors blanket, they get converted into a cloud, and when this cloud is lifted to a higher altitude, then it drops down the extra vapors or the liquid which was already present in the form of the water vapors. So these liquid droplets, they fall onto the earth surface in different forms. So that means the precipitation process, that happens because of the two reasons. The first and the foremost reason is that the temperature decreases uniformly as we move up and up in the atmosphere. That means at the higher altitudes, the temperature will be very low. And as the temperature is decreasing, the capacity of the air blanket, that is also decreasing to hold the moisture. That moisture which is not retained by this blanket, that falls onto the earth surface in the form of the different types of precipitation, and the different forms of the precipitation, which may be the rainfall or the snowfall or the hailstorm or the sleet. There are number of forms. Now the precipitation, that is classified based upon the methods which are used to lift this air mass to higher altitudes. So if there is natural phenomena that is occurring because of the temperature change, that type of precipitation, that is known as the convective precipitation. If the air mass is being lifted up because of this certain barrier in the path, that means for example the mountains, if the wind is blowing and the clouds are moving up because of the obstruction of the mountains, then that is known as the orographic precipitation. Or if the two air masses are colliding, then that type of precipitation is known as the cyclonic precipitation. So when the condensation happens, the air is cooled and it is saturated, because each and every part of the blanket, that is covered with the moisture. But the problem which was present, that the process of this cooling air mass, that is performed only when the air mass moves up to the higher altitudes, and this higher altitude is reached because of these different three methods. Now one by one we will discuss all these three types of precipitation. So starting with the first one, that is the convective precipitation. Now what is this convective precipitation? So when the air above the land that gets heated up by some cause, usually that is because of the sunlight. So if that area is exposed to the higher temperature, that means the temperature is high at this location. Now when the temperature is high, that means the pressure will be low. So that is a low pressure region, that is denoted by LP. Now because of this low pressure and because of this warm air which is present here, the warm air being light in its nature, that will be lifting up. That means from this place the air will be rising up to the atmosphere. That means there will be a vacuum or there will be an empty space at this particular location. Because of this, the cool air which is present in the surrounding and the cooler air being at the higher pressure, the cool air flows from high pressure to the low pressure region, and again that gets heated up and again that will be lifted up, and when it reaches a sufficient height, it gets converted in the form of the cloud, and this cloud, upon reaching up to a certain level, it gets precipitated in the different forms. So the warmer air that rises up and it cools down and then it precipitates. So this type of precipitation that is occurring because of the convection process, the heating up of the land area, that process is known as the convection. So this convection process that is doing the convective precipitation, which is showery in nature. That means usually that is the rainfall which is occurring because of such type of precipitation, and the intensity that may be varying depending upon the location. The second type of precipitation, that is known as the cyclonic precipitation. Now what is the cyclonic precipitation? A cyclone is basically a region in the atmosphere with large low pressure. So when the low pressure is present, then the winds from the high pressure, they tend to move towards the low pressure. Now because of the rotation of the earth, there is a pseudo force, or which is known as the virtual force, which is known as the Coriolis force. Now that force, what it does, it circulates these winds which are approaching the low pressure region, and these winds which are flowing from the high pressure to the low pressure region, they circulate around the low pressure region in the form of a cyclone, and this circular wind motion, that region which is encompassed by this circular wind motion, that is known as the cyclone. Because of this circular wind motion, the air mass will be lifted up, and when this air mass is lifted up, the movement of the moist air mass will happen because of the difference in the pressure, and when it reaches up to a sufficient height, it falls down in the form of the different precipitations. That is known as the cyclonic precipitation. Now this cyclonic precipitation, that can be of two types, frontal and the non-frontal precipitation. So the one that we have discussed because of the cyclone, that is known as the non-frontal precipitation. The frontal precipitation, that is occurring because of the collision of the two air masses. Now what are these air masses? These are the packets of the air which are of thousands of kilometer length and width. So a front is basically the location where the two air masses are colliding. Now let's say in this image, the warm front that has been shown to you with the red color and the cold front that is shown with the blue color. So obviously this warm front will be lower in the mass, while the cold front, because of its nature, will be heavier than the warm front. Now when these two collide, the cold front that gets settled down, while the warm front, because of its lighter nature, it gets lifted up. Now the clouds which will be present over the warm front, they will get lifted up and they will be reaching up to a certain height. And the ultimate purpose of these type of precipitation or these obstruction is to create the sufficient altitude for the clouds or the moisture which is present within the clouds. And once it reaches the sufficient altitude, it falls down in the different forms of the precipitation. As you can see here, this warm moist air that is getting lifted up because of the cold air zone or the cold frontal. Now when it reaches a sufficient height, it drops down in the form of the rain or in the different form of the precipitation. Then the next type of precipitation, that is known as the orographic precipitation. Now what is this? So when the air masses are moving, for example, you can see here this is ocean which is getting certain evaporation. Now this evaporated vapors, they will be lifting up because of the wind which is moving in the atmosphere. The winds will be swiping up these blanket of the water vapors. Now these winds, they will be ascending because of the obstruction which is present in the form of the mountain. Now these winds will be lifting up also the blanket of this water vapor. When it reaches the sufficient height, then the water vapor, they get condensed and get converted in the form of the clouds. And if again it reaches up to a certain height, then it falls down in the form of the precipitation. And that's why the rainfall is usually occurring at the mountainous regions. That is the reason, because mountains provide the sufficient altitude which is required by the clouds. But the problem is that the wind that is causing this motion, when the rainfall is happening, that is occurring on this front side. When it moves ahead, then water vapors or the water which was present within the clouds, that is completely dry. That has been completely fallen down. That is completely fallen down on the front side. When it moves to the backward side, then there is no rainfall or very less rainfall. So the air which is moving, that is dry and the descending air, while the air which was at the front side, that was the wet and the ascending air, or that is also known as the moist air or the ascending air. So the area which gets the rainfall, that is known as the windward side of the obstruction, while the shadow region of the rain, which is known as the rain shadow region, that is known as the leeward side. So in this orographic precipitation, this oro, that is representing the mountains. So the precipitation which is occurring because of the striking the barriers like mountains, these forms of precipitation are known as the orographic precipitation. And the precipitation is greater in the windward side of the barrier compared to the leeward side. Now we will discuss what are the different forms of the precipitation. So the precipitation, it occurs in the following forms. Now what are these different following forms? So the first form that we are going to discuss, and which is the major component of the precipitation, that is known as the rainfall. Now that is classified, the water which is falling from the atmosphere, that is classified as the rain when the water droplets, they are of the size of the 0.5 to 6 millimeters. Then only we classify the water droplets as the rain. Now the rain is classified as light, moderate or the heavy rainfall depending upon its intensity. That means in an hour how much rainfall has occurred. So that's why the unit of intensity, that is millimeters per hour. So if that intensity is less than 2.5 millimeter per hour, that type of rain is known as the light rain. If that is between 2.5 to 7.5, that is known as the moderate type of rain. And if it is greater than 7.5, that is known as the heavy rain. Now, this average precipitation, because the intensity that may be varying upon the different regions and in the same region upon the different time durations. So that's why we take the average precipitation value. So in India, the average precipitation, that is roughly 120 centimeters, while that is greater than the average precipitation of the world, which is at 100 centimeter. Now this is, we are talking per year. So this average precipitation for a year, that is known as the annual average rainfall. So how do we calculate this average annual rainfall? So for that, we take the 30 years data. So for example, if we want to calculate the average precipitation in 2021, so we would take the data from 1990 to 2020. So this 30 years data, for every year there will be certain precipitation that will be summed up for entire 30 years, and that will be divided by the number of years, that is usually 30. So that would give us the average precipitation for the 2021. Now if the rainfall in a particular day, if that is greater than 2.5 millimeter, so that day is known as the rainy day. So these were the few terms related to the rain. Moving on to the next form of the precipitation, that is known as the snow. Now the snow, it consists of the ice crystals, which is combined form of the ice flakes. So usually you might have observed the snowfall, that is, you must have observed it personally, or you might have seen it in the movies or in the form of the different images. So the ice flakes, when they are falling through the atmosphere, that is known as the snowfall. And what is important, that density of it, that is taken roughly as 0.1 gram per cc, while the density of the water, that is 1 gram per cc. So that must be catered to, that snow is lesser in weight in comparison to the water. Then the third form of the precipitation, that is the drizzle. When the water droplets are of size lesser than 0.5 millimeter, because we have classified the rainfall as the water droplets between 0.5 to 6 millimeter. So the area which is left, the space which is left below 0.5 millimeter, that is classified as the drizzle. And the intensity of drizzle, that should be less than 1 millimeter per hour. And in this case, particles are looking like that they are floating into the air. You might have seen that whenever there is very less intensity of the rainfall, you might have observed the rain droplets, they are particularly stationary in the atmosphere. So it looks like that the entire atmosphere is moist. So this image that is representing the drizzle, the first image that was representing the snow. And the fourth form of the precipitation, that is known as the glaze. So when the rain or the drizzle, that means the water droplet, when it comes in contact with the cold ground at around 0 degrees Celsius, which is the freezing temperature of the water. So obviously at that temperature, the water is converted into the ice coating, which is termed as the glaze. And this image that is representing the glaze. So you might have seen these type of icicles which are forming because of the very low temperature of the atmosphere. When the precipitation was happening, that was happening in the form of the water droplets. Okay, so be careful about that. The water droplets were falling through the atmosphere, but when it reaches the ground or any object which is having 0 degree temperature, which is the freezing temperature, the water, when it touches the cold surface, it gets converted into the ice coating, which is known as the glaze. Then the next form is known as the sleet. It is the frozen raindrop which is formed when the rain it falls through the air at subatmospheric temperature or the sub-freezing temperature. What it means, for example, let's say this is the atmosphere, so this is the cloud, so the rainfall is happening from here. Now at this location these are the water droplets, but when it has left the cloud and it has reached up to certain distance, then after this it is getting converted into the frozen raindrops, and in the form of the frozen raindrops it is falling onto the earth's surface. So this form of the precipitation, that is known as the sleet, which is shown in the first image. Now similar to this, there is second term that is known as the hailstorm. So if the irregular ice particles, if they combine with each other to form a lump, that means a mass of the size greater than 8 millimeter, then that is known as the hail. Now the difference between the sleet and the hail is that this hail is usually the opaque, while the sleet that is transparent in nature. That means you can see through it. And this hail that was falling directly in the form of this ice crystal, this combined ice particles, but this sleet that was getting converted into the ice form through the atmosphere. Okay, so that is the difference. So here we complete all the types of the precipitation and all the forms of the precipitation. In the next video we will study the different methods to measure the rainfall. Thank you.